Okay, so after you've sewed all of your fabric circles and you've cut your plastic template, the next thing that you're going to want to do is, before you start any sewing, is lay out your circles on the floor, and then create whatever formation you want to do. So for this quilt, I am doing a 6x6 quilt. So it's 6 rows of circles with 6 circles in each row. And I just chose 36 because this is my new high tea fabric collection, which has a total of 36 prints. So that number just worked out well for this quilt. But you can do whatever formation you want for your quilt. For this one, I'm doing 6x6. So you're gonna lay that all out. And then as you can see here, this is not finished yet. I only have 3 of my 6 rows assembled so far. So this is my first row with 6 circles in this row. And I like to label them. So this was row 1, this is row 2, row 3, and then I have my 3 other stacks of rows right here all ready to go. So you really, you assemble it just like you would a traditional quilt, except that you're doing circles, and you're doing it, you're sewing it like this, which isn't really traditional. But what I'm saying is, you know, you want to have your rows with your circles in each row prepared just like you would a traditional quilt. Okay, and now keep in mind that this quilt, it's awesome, it doesn't have any binding. This is how your edges are going to look finished. So the reason why I'm saying that is you're going to want to keep that in mind when you're marking with your plastic template paper. So when you start marking, so let's, for an example, let's pretend that this circle was my first circle in this row. When you mark, you want to make sure that you mark only on the edges that you are going to sew and that are going to be folded. Okay, so if this circle was to be here, I would only mark here and here, because these are edges that are going to eventually be sewed and folded. You don't want to mark here and here because that's going to be your outer edge, and you don't want to have a pen mark there because that's going to be exposed. Another way to think about it is you don't want to mark anywhere on your quilt or anywhere on the circle where binding would be if this was, you know, your traditional quilt with binding. So you'd have, you know, binding all the way on the outside. Again, you just want to mark your square where it will be sewed and folded here. Okay, so if this circle was here, was this part of this quilt, when I'm marking, I will mark here, here, and here, because that's where it's going to be sewn and folded, right? Does that make sense? If this circle was this part of the quilt, then I would be marking all 4 sides of my template. If this circle was over here, I would be marking everywhere but this outer edge. Just think about it. You don't want to mark where binding would be if this were a traditional quilt, or another way to put it is you just don't want to be binding on the outer edge of your quilt, or you don't want to be marking your plastic template on your outer edge of your quilt. So I hope that makes sense. And also, before you start marking, one thing that you got to remember is you want to cover up that hole. So when you lay out all of your circles on the floor, you know, in whatever formation you want, so I did my 6x6 formation, you want to make sure that the side of your circle with that hole that you cut is facing up. Because what you're going to do is when you sew, you're going to want to fold that over and that be hidden. And so with that in mind, when you mark with your plastic template, you want to make sure, you want to keep in mind that you're trying to hide that hole. Okay, so let's see. So if this circle were to be here, so earlier I was showing you the circle like this because I forgot to mention that that the hole needs to be facing you. So let's say that, so really it would need to be facing this way. So if this circle, let's pretend that this circle was my first circle, the top corner of this quilt. So what I would want to do is position my circle this way, right? Because you're going to want to hide that. And when you come over and mark it, you're going to want to line this up. So make sure all 4 corners of the template are in your circle. You know, place it down. And then you're going to want to take your fabric marking tool or your fabric pen and then mark here and here. And see the placement of this hole, because this is going to eventually be hidden like that later when you sew it and then do a top stitch like that. It's going to be hidden. So you just want to keep in mind that you're trying to hide that hole. You don't want the hole to be up here, because later when you assemble your quilt, then that hole will still be exposed. So here you can see that this hole on this quilt is right here, and this hole will be hidden over here. So so yeah, I guess the 2 things that I want you to remember from this video are that when you mark your circles, well, okay, actually the 3 things that you want to remember is number 1, to make sure that the holes are facing you. And then number 2, when you mark your quilt, remember to only mark where you will be folding and sewing your quilt. Or in other words, don't mark on the outer edges of your quilt, where if this were a traditional quilt, that's where binding would be. And then the 3rd thing is to remember that when you are marking your circles, to make sure to keep in mind of where that hole is, because you're going to want it to be hidden later.